Hey everyone, welcome back to Darkverse. I'm Isaac Nightshade, and tonight I'm going to take you on a journey through a town that should never have been forgotten. It's a place where the streets used to hum with life, but now they're empty save for the things that used to be people. This is a story about a town cursed by its own history. A town where the missing don't stay gone. What started as a quiet life turned into a horrifying struggle for survival. When my friend uncovered a terrifying truth, one that he couldn't escape no matter how hard he tried. You're about to hear what happens when a town's dark past comes back to claim its due. Believe me, after tonight you'll think twice about stepping into an empty street under a full moon. So get ready, because this is a tale you won't soon forget. Let's dive in. The thing about small towns is that they have a way of wrapping themselves around you like an old familiar blanket. You get so used to its creaks and groans that you don't question them. You just let the days bleed into one another. The seasons shifting imperceptibly like nothing really changes. Maybe that's why I never thought much about how the town felt off until it did. It began quietly, like the soft rustling of leaves just before a storm. At first I thought I was imagining things. It was just a passing unease. The kind that comes and goes, but then the feeling started to linger. There was a subtle shift in the air, something that made the evening chill crawl under my skin even on the warmest nights. The kind of cold that isn't from the weather but from something else, something older. I remember the first night I really noticed it. It was an ordinary Tuesday, or at least it started that way. The sun had just set, painting the sky with faint streaks of purple and orange. I was walking home from the market, the familiar creak of the old wooden sign outside Miller's Grocery still echoing in my ears. It's funny how even mundane sounds can trigger that familiar comfort. But then as I crossed the old bridge leading into town, I saw him, a boy. He stood by the churchyard near the cemetery, his back straight and unmoving. I wouldn't have thought much of it if I hadn't noticed his eyes, hollow like two black voids that seemed to drink in the light. For a split second I thought I'd imagined it. The boy wasn't even moving, his face frozen in a way that felt unnatural. He didn't belong. He wasn't like any other child I'd seen around here. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. After all, I was alone in the dusk. And the world sometimes has a way of making shadows seem more sinister. But when I blinked, the boy was still there staring at the graveyard. I shivered. Something in the air felt wrong, and for the first time the town felt alien to me. I turned quickly, walking a little faster, my heartbeat speeding up for reasons I couldn't explain. I didn't look back. The next day the unease was still there, thicker than before. The air felt heavier. The sky clouded in a way I'd never seen in this part of the world. I went about my daily routine, work, errands, talking with the usual people, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Something wasn't right. People were different, quiet, hushed, like they were all holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I bumped into Jenny, my old friend from school, outside the post office. She looked tired, her eyes dull in a way that made her look older than her years. I smiled at her, but her gaze didn't meet mine. "You okay?" I asked, but she didn't seem to hear me at first. Jenny blinked, snapping out of whatever trance she was in. She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just, a little tired." There was something off about her voice, as though she wasn't telling me the full truth, but I didn't press. Small towns like this, people don't ask too many questions. As I walked away, I felt a strange weight in my chest, like the air itself had grown heavier. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. It wasn't just Jenny. There was something about the way the townspeople were moving, how their eyes flickered nervously when they spoke, like they were trying to hide something. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt it deep in my bones. That night, I stayed. It wasn't intentional, really. There just seemed to be a pull, a reluctance to leave the safety of my house. My living room felt colder than usual, and the flickering light from the lamp in the corner cast strange shadows on the walls. I told myself it was nothing, just my nerves getting the best of me. After all, what could possibly go wrong in a town like this? But then I heard it. A knock. Not a loud, urgent knock, but a slow, deliberate one. The kind that makes your heart skip. It came from the door. My fingers froze over the book I'd been reading. I told myself it was probably just a neighbor, maybe Mrs. Harper asking if I'd seen her cat again. But deep down I knew better. I wasn't expecting anyone. I stood up slowly, my feet reluctant to touch the floor. The air felt wrong, thick, like something was just beyond the door waiting for me to open it. I hesitated, hand resting on the doorknob. It knocked again, soft, persistent. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I peeked through the peephole but I couldn't see anything. The porch was empty. I blinked, thinking I must have been imagining things. But when I opened the door, nothing. The porch light hummed in the silence, and for a brief moment I thought I saw something move. Just a shadow at the edge of the yard, near the church. My heart raced as I closed the door quickly, locking it behind me. I couldn't explain why, but I didn't feel safe anymore. The following morning, the town was quieter than usual. People walked with their heads down, avoiding eye contact. The sun hung low in the sky, too pale as if the clouds were holding it captive. I didn't know it then, but this was the last time I'd see the town the way I remembered it. I went to the market, hoping to find something normal, but even the aisles felt empty. The shelves, stocked with goods, seemed more like a display than a place of commerce. No one was talking, and when I passed by the checkout, the cashier, someone I'd known for years, glanced up at me with a strange, vacant expression. "Did you hear?" she asked, quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "Hear what?" I asked, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. "About the boy, the one who's been standing by the cemetery." I froze. She went on, her voice barely above a whisper. "They say he's not really a boy. He's something else. Something that's been here for a long time. But no one talks about it. They just disappear." I felt my pulse quicken. I hadn't said anything about the boy to anyone. No one else had seen him, or so I thought. I swallowed, trying to shake off the rising panic in my chest. "Just be careful," she said, her voice shaking. "Some things don't belong here." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing faint knocks, like the sound of someone tapping gently at my door, but when I checked, no one was there. I felt the weight of the silence pressing down on me, and I couldn't shake the sensation that something was lurking just outside, waiting for me to venture out. The shadows seemed to grow longer, the air colder. I knew the truth now. This wasn't just a town anymore. It was a place where something ancient, something malicious had begun to stir. The boy, whoever or whatever he was only the beginning, and I was afraid that I was the next one to disappear. I remember the day Sarah didn't show up like it was yesterday. The sun hung lazily in the sky, and the air smelled like damp earth and fresh pine. Sarah and I had planned to meet by the old creek near the edge of the woods, our usual spot. We'd spent so many afternoons there, skipping stones and talking about our futures, about anything and everything. It was our haven, our escape from the dull hum of the small town. But when I arrived, the creek was empty. Sarah wasn't there. At first I thought maybe she was just running late, but as the minutes stretched into an hour, a gnawing feeling began to settle in my stomach. It wasn't like her to be late, especially not when she knew how much we looked forward to our afternoons together. I sent her a message, then another, then a third, but there was no response. That was strange too. She always responded, even if it was just a short, "Sorry, I'm on my way." The unease continued to grow, but I pushed it aside. I thought maybe she had gone to visit her mom, or that she'd gotten caught up with something else. It wasn't a big deal, but it didn't stop there. That night, I texted her again. No reply. The next morning, I called her. No answer. That's when I knew something was wrong. By the third day, panic had begun to creep into the edges of my thoughts. Sarah's mother, Grace, came to my house, her face pale and drawn. She was always a little anxious, but this time, something was different, something heavy in the air. "She hasn't come home, has she?" asked, her voice cracking. It wasn't a question anymore, it was a statement. Grace had already begun to suspect what I was starting to fear. I shook my head. "No, she's not answering me either. I've called her over and over." Grace's hands trembled as she clutched her purse. "I don't know what to do. I've called the police. They said she's probably off with a friend." Her words trembled, but she fought to keep her composure. She would have told me though. I know my girl. I tried to comfort her though deep down I knew this wasn't just a case of a teenager slipping away for a few days without telling anyone. Sarah wasn't the type to disappear. Not for this long. The police weren't much help either. They told Grace the same thing. She was probably off with someone, maybe staying with another friend, or visiting a distant relative. They weren't concerned. But I was. It had been 5 days since Sarah vanished. When I finally did what I should have done, the first moment I realized she wasn't coming back, I went to the woods. The woods where Sarah and I used to spend so many hours talking, laughing, letting the world slip away. The air was damp, thick with the scent of decaying leaves and rich soil. It was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle. It felt like the world was holding its breath, as though waiting for something to happen. There was no sound of birds, no rustle of branches, just a heavy silence that pressed against my ears. I walked along the familiar path we used to take, a mixture of unease and determination gnawing at my insides. My thoughts kept returning to Sarah. Where had she gone? Why hadn't she told anyone? And why did it feel like something was watching me now, moving just beyond the corner of my vision? The trees stood tall and imposing around me, their branches weaving together like twisted fingers. I tried to shake the feeling of being watched, but the longer I walked, the more it pressed on me, suffocating. That's when I saw it. A flash of color. At first I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, but then I stepped closer, and there it was, unmistakable, Sarah's backpack. My heart stopped. It was lying there, half hidden beneath the gnarled roots of an old oak tree, its zipper open, and the contents spilling out across the forest floor. There was no sign of Sarah, just her backpack, a stark, chilling contrast to the otherwise empty, silent wood. I knelt down, my fingers trembling as I reached for it. The bag was soaked, the fabric dark with moisture. The scent of the forest seemed to cling to it, damp earth, old leaves and something else, something metallic, like blood. I flinched and pulled my hand back, but I couldn't stop staring at it. I couldn't stop the horrible gnawing feeling in my chest that told me this wasn't right. I sifted through the bag carefully, hoping, praying to find something that would make sense of this. A note, a phone, something to explain why Sarah had left it behind. But all I found were her books, her notebook, a half-eaten granola bar, and a couple of pens. Nothing out of place, nothing to explain why she had vanished without a word. I turned the bag over, hoping there would be something I missed, some sign that she was just a little further into the woods, hiding, maybe playing a prank on me. But when the bag flipped over, a small crumpled piece of paper fell out. I unfolded it, my hands shaking. It was Sarah's handwriting, but the words, they didn't make sense. I hear it. It's here. It's waiting. It won't let me go. I don't know how long I have left. I dropped the paper, the air thickening around me. My breath caught in my throat as the realization hit me like a wave. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a runaway situation. Sarah had been trying to tell me something, something she couldn't say aloud. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as the wind shifted, the trees creaking ominously. My eyes darted around, scanning the wood. I could feel the presence of something, something that wasn't supposed to be here. Then, I heard it, a low, guttural sound, almost like a hum, vibrating through the ground beneath me. The sound was close, too close. I jumped to my feet, my heart raced. I scanned the trees again, but the woods were as still as ever, the only movement coming from the wind playing with the branches. But that hum, it was still there, hanging in the air like an ominous warning. I didn't wait to find out what was making that sound. I turned on my heels and ran, the underbrush snapping beneath my feet. I didn't stop to look back, didn't stop until I was safely back at the edge of the woods, my chest heaving with panic. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me, watching me, waiting. As I caught my breath, my thoughts raced, replaying the words on that piece of paper. It's here. It's waiting. I wanted to believe it was just Sarah being paranoid, just her imagination running wild. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was out there, something that had taken her, and something that was still watching. And I was next. The air had grown thick with unease, like a storm that lingers on the horizon, but never quite breaks. It had been weeks since Sarah vanished, but every day seemed to drag on,
each one heavier than the last. It started with whispers, faint, passing murmurs that filled the air when people thought I wasn't listening. The town, my home, the place I had always known, now felt like it was hiding something I couldn't quite grasp. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that my mind had started playing tricks on me after everything that had happened. But then one by one, more people began to disappear. Lucas, who lived 2 houses down from me, was the first to vanish after Sarah. I remember it clearly, because his disappearance was almost too perfect. One day, he was there, leaning against the fence, joking around with his friends, and the next day, nothing. No trace, no explanation. His parents didn't even seem shocked. They didn't panic like I expected them to. It was as if they knew he was already gone. Then came Emily, a girl I'd grown up with since elementary school. We'd spent countless hours playing in the fields behind the school, laughing, and talking about our childish dream. I had always assumed Emily was invincible in that naive way you do when you're young, but she too disappeared, just like Sarah, like Lucas. There were no clues, no reason. The police didn't seem concerned, offering nothing but half-hearted assurances. It's just a coincidence, they said. Some people just leave town. It's probably nothing. But I knew better. Every time someone went missing, it felt like a piece of the town slipped away. The streets grew quieter, the shops were empty, even the dogs, who used to bark constantly, grew silent, as if they too had learned not to speak up. The sun seemed to set earlier each night, and the wind always carried an edge to it, a cool bite that made my skin crawl when I stepped outside. It wasn't just a disappearance, it was an erasure. And then, it happened again. Anna, my cousin, had been living with us for the past few months. Her parents had been in a car accident, and she had nowhere else to go. I was grateful to have her around, but that didn't stop the inevitable. One morning, she was gone, just like the other. Her room was empty, the bed neatly made, like she had never even been there. Her clothes were still in the closet, her toothbrush still in the bathroom. I went through her things, desperate for some sign, some clue, as to where she might have gone, but it was like she had vanished into thin air. I tried to talk to my parents about it, but they dismissed it, just like the rest of the town. She's probably with her friends, don't worry about it, my father said with that forced smile that didn't reach his eye. But I saw the unease creeping into his face, the way his hands trembled when he reached for his coffee. I knew he was scared, just like I was. There was no escaping the feeling that something was wrong. The town had changed. People had changed. I could feel eyes on me wherever I went, as if something was watching, waiting for the right moment to come for me too. And then the whispers started. It was late, probably past midnight when I first heard them. I had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. The house was still, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards settling beneath the weight of the night. The wind was howling outside, rattling the windows, and bending the tree. I thought I heard a distant thud, like something hitting the roof, but I was too tired to get up and check. Then, it came again, a low murmur, barely audible, coming from somewhere outside my window. It sounded like voices, faint and soft, but there was an urgency to them, a sense of desperation. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears, trying to make out what they were saying. At first, I thought it might have been a group of kids playing, but the voices didn't sound right. They were too low, too hushed, and the words they didn't form into anything coherent, just snippet, broken phrases. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Was someone out there? I glanced over at the clock. It was nearly 2 a.m. There was no reason for anyone to be out there, especially not at this hour. I pushed myself out of bed, careful not to make a sound, and tiptoed to the window. I pulled back the curtains, just a little, just enough to peek outside. But when I looked, there was nothing, just the empty street, bathed in the dull light from the street lamp at the corner. The wind tugged at the branches of the trees, swaying them like skeletal hands. No sign of anyone, no movement, just the dead quiet of the night. I stood there for a moment, frozen, unsure of what I had just heard. Had it been my imagination? Was I just starting to crack under the weight of it all? But no, the whispers came again, louder this time. I pressed my forehead against the cold window pane, trying to catch every word. My pulse quickened. It sounded like laughter, or was it crying? I couldn't tell. The voices seemed to be overlapping, like they were coming from different directions, from places just beyond my line of sight. My stomach churned with a growing sense of dread. There was something wrong, something deeply wrong. With trembling hands, I pushed the window open, the old wood groaning. As it slid upward, I leaned out into the night, straining to hear. The air smelled like wet earth and decay, thick and suffocating. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I scanned the street, my breath coming in shallow gasps. And then I saw it, a figure, no, a shadow standing across the street, beneath the flickering streetlight. It was too dark to make out any details, but I could see the outline of it, tall, thin, looming. It was staring directly at me. I froze, unable to move, unable to blink. My body was paralyzed, my heart thudding in my chest. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, and I felt as though the very air around me was thick with something dark, something malignant. The shadow didn't move. It didn't need to. I could feel it, the presence of something watching, something waiting. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished into the darkness, like it had never been there at all. I slammed the window shut and backed away, my body trembling uncontrollably. The whispers stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. The weight of it pressed down on me, suffocating. I wanted to hide, to escape, but where could I go? I knew deep down that it was already too late. The town was emptying out, and I was next. It started with whispers. At first they were little more than hushed conversations. Murmurs of unease passed between parents, who hadn't yet been consumed by the fear that now gnawed at my insides. But then, it was the children, my children, who spoke of things I couldn't explain. Their stories were so vivid, so certain, that I could no longer dismiss them as mere imagination. It was after Emily's disappearance that I first noticed it. The kids in the neighborhood, once so full of laughter and noise, were now unnervingly quiet. Their faces, usually flushed with the innocent joy of childhood, were pale and strained. It was as if they knew something that the adults didn't, and the more I tried to reach out to them, the more I felt the cold, invisible walls they were putting up between us. One afternoon, I was walking to the corner store when I saw 3 children sitting on the stoop of the old church. They were huddled together, their small voices barely audible over the soft rustling of the wind. I recognized them. They were all from the neighborhood, children of families I'd known for years, but today, they looked different. They were wide-eyed, their heads swiveling nervously, glancing back and forth like they were expecting something, waiting for something to emerge from the shadow. I walked closer, my footsteps crunching on the gravel, and they fell silent. It wasn't until I was almost upon them that one of the boys, a little blonde-haired kid named Caleb, dared to look up at me. His face was drained of color, and his eyes held a strange, unfathomable fear. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to mask the creeping sense of dread crawling up my spine. Caleb didn't answer right away. Instead, he exchanged a glance with the others, his lips pressed tightly together. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "It comes when the moon's full." He paused, licking his lips nervously, his eyes darting around. "It smells funny, like something cold, and then it has eyes that burn like embers." I stared at him, not sure what to say. His words felt like a cold draft through a cracked door, unsettling, but just out of reach. The other children, a girl with dark hair named Mia, and a boy named Noah, nodded, in eerie unison. Their faces were etched with a fear that made my skin crawl. "What does it want?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. Mia spoke this time, her voice barely audible. It takes us away, but only the ones who wander too far. We have to stay close to home, or it gets us." I felt a chill creep down my spine, and I found myself stepping back, unsure of what I was hearing. It was like something out of a nightmare. Yet, the fear in their eyes, the way their voices cracked, and quivered with terror, made me realize they weren't telling stories, they were warning me. I tried to convince myself that it was just a childish tale, a creation of overactive imaginations, but there was something in their eyes, something desperate, that made me uneasy, and that night when I went to bed, the wind seemed to pick up. It howled around the corners of the house, rattling the windows, and sending an eerie whistle through the trees outside. I kept hearing things, scratching sounds against the walls, little taps, like nails on the glass. But when I pulled the curtains aside, there was nothing but the dark, empty street. I didn't sleep much that night. The thought of those children's words gnawed at me, turning over and over in my mind. It comes when the moon's full. It was then that I began to notice the subtle shifts around me. The sky had been thick with clouds for days, but tonight, the full moon hung heavy above the town, casting its pale light over everything. A strange chill filled the air, like the breath of something old and hungry, something that had been waiting a long time. The next day, things felt different. The town, usually so still, now seemed suffocated, like the weight of something unseen pressed down on it. I saw the children again, but this time, there was no chatter, no giggling or running around. They stood in clusters, their heads low, eyes cast downward, as if they feared being noticed. Every so often, one would glance up at me, but their gazes held nothing but fear and anxiety. They knew they had seen something I hadn't, something that was just out of reach, but close enough to feel. That afternoon, I went to the library. I needed answers, though I wasn't sure what I was even looking for. I combed through the old books in the history section, searching for any mention of disappearances, strange creatures, anything that could explain what was happening to my town. But it was the old journal that caught my attention. It was tucked away in a dusty corner, leather-bound and old enough to feel like it belonged to another time. The pages inside were yellowed with age, the writing faded, and hard to decipher, but as I flipped through the fragile pages, one entry stopped me cold. The creature comes when the moon is full. It lives beneath the town, waiting for the darkness to take hold. It was here long before the first house was built, and it will be here long after we are gone. It feeds on the children, for they are the most vulnerable. The old ones say it has eyes that burn with the light of forgotten souls, eyes that never blink. They say it waits beneath the earth, ready to rise when the time is right. I froze, staring at the words, my heart pounding in my chest. The description mirrored exactly what the children had said. The same eerie details, the same terrifying eyes, the same hunger. It was real. That night I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The town was silent, too silent. The wind had died down, leaving behind an oppressive stillness that felt like the calm before a storm. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with what I had learned. I wanted to tell someone, to scream it from the rooftops, but what good would that do? No one would believe me. The town had already turned its back on the truth. And then I heard a faint rustling sound, coming from the yard outside. I tensed, listening, my pulse quickening. It was too quiet, the kind of silence that sets your skin on edge, like the world is holding its breath. The wind had stopped, and in that eerie calm, the sound was unmistakable, a soft scraping like something clawing at the earth. I slowly got out of bed, my legs weak beneath me. I crept to the window, my hand trembling as I pulled back the curtain just enough to see outside. The street was empty, but the shadows cast by the moonlight seemed to move, shifting in ways that didn't feel natural. And then in the corner of the yard, I saw it, a figure, pale, thin, its eyes glowing faintly like dying ember. It was crouched low to the ground, its head tilted to the side as if listening for something. I could barely make out the shape, but the eyes, those glowing ember-like eyes, were unmistakable. I stepped back, my breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet were frozen to the floor, and then just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into the darkness. The air seemed to grow heavier, suffocating. I knew deep in my bones that it was coming, that the creature beneath the town had risen, and it was waiting for the next full moon, waiting for the next child to wander too far, and I was terrified that this time it would come for me.
The library had always been a place I'd avoided. It wasn't out of fear, at least not at first. It was just forgotten. Dust settled thick on the shelves. A film that told the story of years and years of neglect. Most of the town's residents had long since stopped visiting. It had become a relic, a place where books went to die, their pages yellowing and curling. The silence of the rows of abandoned shelves heavy with something unspeakable. I had been there to look for answers, the disappearances, the whispers from the children, the fear in their eyes. They all pointed to something ancient, something buried beneath the town's surface. But the more I searched, the more I felt a creeping unease settle over me, like I was trespassing into a place that wasn't meant to be disturbed. And yet, I couldn't stop. Every night I returned, desperate to uncover the truth, even as the shadows in the corners of the library seemed to grow darker, thicker. On that evening, I wandered through aisles of forgotten books, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet that hadn't seen a vacuum in years. The scent of old paper filled my lungs, an odd mixture of must and decay. The overhead lights flickered intermittently, casting long, erratic shadows that seemed to dance just beyond the edge of my vision. I had been there for hours already, the only sound the quiet rustling of pages, as I flipped through ancient tomes and dusty journals, none of which gave me the answers I sought. Then, in a back corner tucked behind a stack of forgotten encyclopedias, I found it. A leather-bound book, its cover cracked and weathered, but the strange symbols embossed on it caught my attention immediately. It was like nothing I'd seen before, ancient, twisted designs that looked almost alive, as if the book itself were breathing. I ran my fingers over the cover, the surface cold and smooth, and felt an inexplicable shiver crawl up my spine. I couldn't explain why, but I knew that this was the one. I opened the book carefully, the pages fragile beneath my fingertips, almost as if they would disintegrate if I wasn't gentle enough. The words were written in an old, flowing script, some language I couldn't recognize, but there was something about it that felt familiar, like I'd seen it in my dreams, heard it whispered on the wind. The book seemed to hum in my hands, the air around me thickening as if the very room had come alive. As I read, I found that the book wasn't just a history of the town. It was a record of its sins, its forgotten rituals, its dark. Founders of the town, in their desperation to keep something sealed beneath the earth, had made a pact. They had called upon ancient forces to keep the creature buried, but only for a time. The ritual, as the book described, required a balance, a sacrifice. The town's bloodline would continue, generation after generation, but there would always be one taken, one who would disappear, one who would be chosen to feed whatever lay beneath. My hands trembled as I read on. The creature wasn't just a figment of the children's imagination, it was real, it was waiting. The pages described in chilling detail the creature's form, pale skin, hollow eyes that glowed like dying embers, a figure that stalked beneath the earth, waiting for the blood to spill. It preyed on the children, on the vulnerable. It waited for the moon to be full, when the air grew heavy, thick with an unnatural cold. As I turned each page, the weight of the words seemed to press harder on me, suffocating. I couldn't stop myself. My mind raced, trying to absorb everything, every single detail, every fragment of information. My breath grew shallow, and I started to feel dizzy, as if the room itself was spinning around me. It was as if the book was pulling me in, as if it were forcing me to learn things that were never meant to be known. The more I read, the less I understood, but the more certain I became that whatever had been bound beneath the earth was coming back. But then, near the end of the book, something changed. The pages became smudged, as if someone had hurriedly flipped through them, desperate to reach the last few lines. The ink was uneven, scratched out in some places, written over in frantic scrawls in others. I paused at one page, the words distorted and hard to read. Someone had ripped the final page from the book. The last page. A cold, sick feeling settled in my gut as I turned the pages again.
desperately searching for what had been lost. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, the air so thick that it felt like I was suffocating. I turned the page, expecting nothing more, when I saw the frantic writing that stretched across the bottom of the last remaining page. The handwriting was barely legible, the words hurried and erratic, as if the writer had been in a panic. The ink bled into the paper, but the message was clear. They are coming back. I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. My heart raced. The walls of the library seemed to close in around me. The air felt heavy and wrong, like something was shifting, like the very earth beneath me was waking up, groaning and stretching, preparing for whatever was coming. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at those words, but when I looked up, everything had changed. The light in the library flickered, dimmed, then went out entirely, leaving me in the dark. My breath came in ragged gasps, as I stood frozen, staring into the pitch-black void. Suddenly, I heard it, the sound of something scraping against the floor, the faintest whisper of movement, too soft, too slow, but unmistakable. It was coming from the shadows. I wanted to move, to run, but my legs refused to cooperate. I was trapped in the darkness, with the thing I had just learned about. My pulse thrummed in my ears, as the scraping grew louder, closer, and then from the corner of the room, a figure emerged. At first it was just a silhouette, shrouded in darkness, but then I saw its eyes, those pale glowing embers, burning through the shadows, locked on me. I could feel its presence, cold and ancient, pressing down on me, crushing me under its weight. The creature was here, the thing that had been buried beneath the town for so long. I wanted to scream, to run, but the words from the children echoed in my mind. It comes when the moon is full. The thing from the town's deepest secrets had returned, and there was no escaping it. The scraping sound stopped. I could hear its breath now, slow and steady, as though it was savoring the moment. Its eyes glowed brighter, piercing through the darkness. I backed away slowly, every step an effort, my feet dragging like they were cemented to the ground. The air grew colder, colder than I'd ever felt before. It felt like the creature was breathing it into me, suffocating me from within. And then in a voice, so soft I almost didn't hear it, it spoke. "You're next." The whisper slithered into my ear, sending a wave of cold dread through me. The thing was real, it was here, and I was too late. It was just past midnight, and I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense that something had shifted. I had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, tossing and turning, my mind trapped in a loop of fragmented thoughts and memory. The events of the past few days, the children's stories, the book I had found in the library, the figure beneath the moon kept swirling in my mind. There was something wrong in the air, something I couldn't put into words. It felt heavier, thicker, as if the town itself were holding its breath, waiting. I had never been a person to wander the streets at night. There was something about the stillness, the way the world seemed to hold its breath in the quiet hours, that made me uneasy, but tonight it felt different. The silence outside my window was unbearable, and I needed to move, to do something, anything to escape the weight of the air in my room. So I threw on a jacket, grabbed my keys, and stepped outside. The moment I crossed the threshold of my house, I felt it. The world seemed darker, colder. The moon, heavy and full, hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets. It bathed the town in a sickly, unnatural light, one that made the familiar feel foreign. Even the houses, which had always felt like they were part of me, seemed distant, almost menacing in the moonlight. I began walking, my feet taking me down the empty streets, my mind racing with questions I didn't have answers to. The sound of my footsteps was oddly muffled, as if the night itself was absorbing the noise. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder every few steps, an instinctive, paranoid response to the creeping feeling that I was not alone. The air grew colder as I moved farther from home, the wind picking up and tugging at the collar of my jacket. But it wasn't just the cold. There was something about the wind, something wrong. It carried a scent, faint but unmistakable, of damp earth, rot, and decay. I kept walking, hoping to outrun the unease gnawing at my insides, but the farther I went, the heavier the air became, pressing down on me like a physical weight. The houses along the street seemed to blur together in the dim light, their outlines indistinct, as if they were fading into the darkness. The only thing that remained clear in my mind was the sound of my own breathing, ragged and shallow, as if I were not supposed to be out here at all. And then, I saw it. At the edge of the cemetery, just past the wrought iron gates, I noticed a figure standing motionless, bathed in the pale light of the moon. For a moment, I thought it might be a trick of the light, my eyes playing games with me, but then it shifted slightly, just enough to confirm that it was real. The figure was tall, impossibly thin, its form dark against the backdrop of the gravestone. I couldn't make out any features, but I could feel its eyes on me, those cold, empty eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. The air around it felt wrong, charged with something I couldn't comprehend. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribcage. My legs felt like lead, unwilling to move. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body betrayed me, my throat clenched, refusing to let out even a sound. The figure didn't move at first. It simply stood there, watching, as if studying me. Time stretched in that moment, bending in a way that made everything feel surreal. My mind screamed for me to turn and run, but my feet remained rooted to the ground. The figure tilted its head, slowly, deliberately, as if it were taking its time, savoring the moment. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and the ground beneath me seemed to tremble. Then in a blink, it disappeared into the shadows, as if it had never been there at all. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, my body still locked in place, my mind racing. My breath came in shallow gasps, my chest tight with panic. I tried to force myself to move, to leave, but my legs felt numb. The sound of my heartbeat thudded in my ears, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out right there in the street. But then something snapped inside me. I had to go. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let whatever that thing was get any closer. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I turned and bolted, running down the street, my feet pounding against the pavement. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. But as I ran, the sound of footsteps echoed behind me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the rush of my own feet creating a phantom noise. But no, the footsteps were real, matching my every step, perfectly I could hear them behind me, soft but distinct, the sound of something or someone following me, keeping pace with my every move. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a cold sweat break out along my spine. I forced myself to run faster, my breath ragged in my throat, but the footsteps only grew louder, closer, closer. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see nothing, but I was wrong. There, just at the edge of my vision, I caught a glimpse of a shadow. It was still there. The figure, moving with a fluid, unnatural grace, was following me. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, a sickly red, burning like dying embers. I stumbled, my foot catching on an uneven patch of pavement, but I quickly regained my balance, the panic driving me forward. The sound of the footsteps, now louder and more distinct, seemed to echo in my head, filling my ears, until it was all I could hear. The figure was getting closer. I could feel it, feel its presence behind me, growing stronger with every step. I was almost at the corner of the street when I heard a voice. It wasn't a whisper, it wasn't a scream, it was just a voice, low and guttural, like it was coming from deep within the earth. But the words were clear. You can't. The voice sent a shiver through me, and for the first time in my life I felt truly helpless. My legs felt like they were made of stone, and I could barely move, barely breathe. I wanted to scream, but the sound lodged itself deep in my throat, suffocated by the weight of the night, by the feeling that something was about to break through and consume me. I rounded the corner, nearly colliding with a mailbox, but the footsteps didn't stop. They kept coming, keeping pace with my every movement, matching my desperation. And then, in a moment of clarity, I realized the truth. It wasn't just the figure that was following me. It wasn't just the footsteps that were echoing in my ears. The town was alive with it. The streets, the houses, the air itself. It was all part of it. It was waiting, watching. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that I wasn't just running from something, I was running towards something, and no matter how fast I ran, no matter how far I tried to go, it would catch me. The footsteps grew louder, and I could feel the darkness closing in, and I knew then, with terrifying certainty, that I wasn't going to make it out. The town had changed, but not in the way you might expect. There was no sudden transformation, no dramatic shift in the way people spoke or behaved. The changes were subtle, creeping, like the slow decay of an old building's foundation. No one seemed to notice the quiet, insidious erosion happening around us. Everyone just kept going about their days, as if there was nothing unusual, nothing to question. But I knew better. I felt it, deep in my bones, that something had shifted. It wasn't just the children anymore. It wasn't just Sarah, or Lucas, or Emily, or Anne. People, adults, were disappearing too. Whole families, gone without a trace. At first, I thought I was just imagining it, but the more I looked around, the more I realized I was wrong. The disappearances were real, and no one was talking about them. I went to the local market that morning, my usual routine to distract myself from the gnawing sense of dread that had become my constant companion. But even there, it was impossible to ignore the tension in the air. People moved like shadows, their faces drawn, their eyes avoiding contact. They weren't looking at each other, weren't speaking as freely as they used to. The conversations that I overheard were strained, fragmented. Gossip, fear, rumors, whispers about the missing, whispers about the things no one wanted to acknowledge. But the thing that truly set my heart racing was when I overheard a conversation between two of the older residents, their voices hushed but sharp. "It's happening again," one of them said, a woman with gray hair and wrinkled skin. "They're taking them, all of them." The other woman nodded, her face pale. "It's been happening for years, more and more every time. We should have left when we had the chance." I froze, caught in their words. I hadn't heard anyone speak like that before, as though it were a known fact, an inevitability. What had they meant by happening again? I didn't stay to hear more. I couldn't. I turned quickly and left the market, the conversation echoing in my head like a ghost, leaving me with more questions than answers. That evening, as the sun dipped low beneath the horizon, the town felt colder, quieter. There was a strange stillness to the air, as though the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I walked the streets aimlessly, my thoughts racing. My feet took me past familiar landmarks, the church, the old diner, the faded convenience store, but everything felt distant, like the town I had grown up in was slipping away from me, dissolving like mist in the morning sun. I found myself outside the town hall, a large, weathered building that stood at the center of the square. It had always been a symbol of stability, the place where town meetings were held, where decisions were made. But tonight, as I approached, something felt off. The building seemed darker, more imposing, like a hulking presence looming in the background of the town's pulse. As I neared the front steps, something on the ground caught my eye, a scattering of photographs, abandoned and discarded, like fallen leaves. My heart skipped a beat. I bent down and picked one up, my hands trembling. As I turned it over, it was a picture of a family, 2 parents, a young girl, and a dog standing in front of a small, modest house. I didn't recognize them, but something about the photograph felt familiar, like it belonged to a memory I had forgotten. I glanced around. No one was in sight. The streets were eerily empty, save for the soft rustling of the wind. I reached for another photograph, then another, each one depicting different families, different faces, but all of them had one thing in common. They were gone. The people in the pictures were no longer here, their names erased from the town's records, their homes left empty. And then, I saw it, a photo that stood out among the others. It was of Sarah, her smiling face, her arms wrapped around me as we stood together at the creek. The picture had been torn in half, the edges jagged, but there was no mistaking her face. It felt like a punch to the gut. She had been here, she had belonged here, and now she was gone. I reached for another, my hands trembling as I pulled it from the pile, my breath caught in my throat. It was a photo of my own family, my parents, my younger brother, all of us together in front of our old house. My heart pounded in my chest. Why was this here? What did it mean? I turned the photograph over and saw it. A single line, scribbled in dark ink. They've all gone, you're next. My breath caught in my throat, a choking gasp, a squeaking before I could stop it. The words seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, vibrating through me, as if the paper itself were alive, mocking me. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin, my legs trembled, and I quickly dropped the photograph, watching it flutter to the ground, like a leaf in the wind. My chest tightened, and my mind raced, the world around me spinning in a blur. I took a step back, my heart pounding, so loudly, that I could hear it in my ears. I felt the town pressing in on me, the walls closing in, the silence suffocating, the missing names, the missing faces. They were all starting to make sense. Everyone was disappearing, and there was no stopping it. The town was hollowing out, and it wasn't just the children, it was everyone. I turned, my legs unsteady, as I stumbled away from the pile of photographs. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay here. I had to get out, but as I walked, my footsteps faltering, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The streets were empty, there was no one around, but still, I felt the eyes on me watching. I glanced over my shoulder, my pulse quickening, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a shadow shift in the distance, just at the edge of my vision. It moved with unnatural speed, darting in and out of the shadows, like something or someone was following me. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest, my breath quickened, and I felt my throat tighten. As I tried to swallow, my body screamed for me to move, to run, but my legs refused to cooperate. I stood frozen, watching the darkness stretch, feeling the chill creep up my spine, like icy fingers grazing my skin. And then, I heard it, a low whisper, barely audible, coming from behind. It was the same voice I had heard the night before, the one that had haunted my every step. You can't escape. The voice was so close now, I could feel it curling around my neck, wrapping itself around me like a cold, suffocating. My knees buckled, and I stumbled forward, barely catching myself as I broke into a run, but the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, was still there, matching my every move, always just behind me, always right there, never letting me go. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. All I could do was run and pray that I wouldn't be next. The moon hung low in the sky. When I decided to return to the library, I couldn't shake the thought that someone was pulling at me, urging me to search deeper. The book I'd found earlier had opened a door in my mind that I couldn't close, a door to secrets I wasn't ready to face. But it wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was desperation. The missing names, the hollowed-out families, the empty streets, it all pointed to something ancient, something that had been lying in wait beneath the town. I needed to know what it was. I needed to understand. I moved quietly through the streets, the sound of my footsteps, swallowed by the eerie stillness of the night. The town felt different, darker, as if the shadows themselves had grown longer. The houses, once familiar, now seemed to loom ominously in the background, their windows like dark eyes watching me, judging me. I kept walking, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling with a sensation I couldn't name. It was the feeling of being watched, of being known by something unseen. When I reached the library, the familiar, crumbling facade seemed to sigh under the weight of the darkness. The doors were locked, as they always were at this hour, but I knew where the key was hidden beneath a loose brick, near the back entrance. My hand shook as I retrieved it, the metal cold against my palm as if it were warning me. I opened the door and stepped inside, the musty scent of old paper and dust filling my lungs. The library had always been a place of forgotten things, but tonight it felt like a mausoleum, the air thick with secrets, long buried. I moved through the aisles of books, the silence pressing in on me, like a physical weight. The flickering lights above cast long, jagged shadows across the shelves, creating shapes that seemed to stretch and warp, like they were alive. I reached the back of the library, where the older, more neglected books were kept. The space felt colder here, almost as if it had never truly been part of the rest of the library. That's when I saw it, the wall partially hidden behind a thick curtain of cobwebs and forgotten books. I almost missed it. If I hadn't been staring at the floor trying to make sense of the shadows, I would have walked right by. There, between two tall bookshelves, was a door. Small, unassuming, but there nonetheless. My heart leapt into my throat, the air thickening around me. As I approached, the door was locked, but the key was in my pocket, the same one that had unlocked the main entrance. I felt a strange thrill of anticipation as I slid it into the lock and turned. The door opened with a soft creak, the sound sending a shiver down my spine. The room beyond was dim, its only light coming from the flickering bulb above. I stepped inside cautiously, my feet sinking slightly into the old worn floorboards. The room was small, about the size of a closet, but it was filled with strange markings, symbols, scrawled haphazardly across the walls. The air felt heavier here, as if the very space itself had been tainted by something dark. The symbols on the walls were unlike anything I had ever seen before. They were intricate, winding, filled with a kind of ancient rhythm that made my head spin just looking at them. Some of the markings looked like they had been burned into the stone, while others seemed to writhe and shift beneath my gaze like they were alive. It was like looking at a language that had no name, a language that was meant to be forgotten. I could feel the weight of the history behind these markings pressing down on me, a suffocating sense of something old, something ancient and malevolent. I walked deeper into the room, my breath shallow, the darkness around me closing in. In the center of the room was an altar, a stone slab, worn and weathered with age, stained with something I couldn't identify. It was here, in this small, forgotten chamber, that I understood the truth. The town had been built on cursed ground. The founders, in their desperation, had made a pact with something beneath the earth. Something that demanded a sacrifice every few decades to keep it buried, to keep it from rising. The creature, the entity that had once been sealed away, had fed on the town's blood, its children, its people, and now, after years of dormancy, it was coming back. I staggered back, my mind reeling. The ritual was happening again. It was happening now. I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me, the symbols on the walls seeming to pulse and breathe with a life of their own. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I had uncovered. I thought I could feel the earth beneath me vibrating, as if something deep below was stirring, waking up after years of silence. The walls seemed to close in, and I could feel the oppressive weight of the darkness pressing down on me. I had to leave. I had to get out of here. But then, I felt it, a cold breath on the back of my neck. It was so sudden, so unexpected, that I could feel it, icy, unnatural, like the breath of something not quite human. My skin crawled, as my heart skipped a beat. I turned, my body stiff with fear, my eyes scanning the room, but there was no one there. No one in the small, dimly lit room, just the shadows, shifting and dancing on the walls, their shapes growing longer and more distorted. I felt the air grow colder, the silence stretching out, suffocating me. My mind raced, but I couldn't. The chill on the back of my neck remained, lingering like the touch of something unseen. I backed away, my legs trembling beneath me, my hand reaching out to grasp the door handle. The symbols on the walls seemed to blur, swirling in front of my eyes, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move in the corner of the room, something dark, something alive, and then, I heard it, the whisper. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a voice, low and rasping, coming from somewhere just beyond the edge of my hearing. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear, sickeningly clear. It was calling to me. It was beckoning. The breath on the back of my neck turned colder, and I could feel something moving just behind me, a presence pressing into the space, filling it with dread. I could feel it there, right behind me, its breath hot against my ear. I snapped to the door, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the handle, yanking it open, with a force I didn't know I had. The sound of my own heart thundering in my chest drowned out everything else as I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop running. I didn't dare look back. The whispering, the cold breath, it stayed with me, like a shadow I couldn't escape. The hallway outside the hidden room was empty, silent, but I could feel it. The thing beneath the earth had awoken, and it was hungry. I ran through the library, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence, my breath ragged in my throat. As I reached the main entrance, I looked up, and there, in the window, I saw it, the figure, standing in the shadows, just beyond the glass. Its eyes glowed with that sickly, fiery light, the same light I had seen in the photograph, in the children's stories. I had no idea how it had gotten there, how it had found me, but I knew one thing with terrifying certainty. I was not alone anymore, and neither was the town.
The town had been silent for weeks. The streets, once teeming with life, now eerily empty. It was as if the town itself had gone into hiding, suffocating under the weight of the disappearances. People were vanishing without a trace, one by one. At first it was the children, Sarah, Lucas, Emily, and Anna. But as the weeks stretched on, it wasn't just the young ones. Whole families were disappearing. The town's heartbeat seemed to slow with each missing person, each empty house, and now the town was a ghost of what it had once been. The homes stood like hollow shells, their windows broken, doors left ajar, forgotten furniture left to rot inside. The streets were still, the kind of stillness that creeps into your bones, that leaves you feeling like something is wrong, like something is always just beyond your line of sight. It was a silence that screamed at you to turn around, to run. I had tried to leave, of course. I had packed up, told myself I couldn't stay in a place like this anymore, but there was something, I don't know what to call it, something that always seemed to pull me back. The air felt heavier with every passing day, as though it was filled with something ancient waiting. I had heard the whispers, the stories, the children's warning, but it wasn't until that night when I walked down the nearly deserted street that I felt it, the change. It started small. At first I thought it was just the wind, or maybe my imagination playing tricks on me. A figure appeared at the far end of the street, standing motionless under a street lamp, its silhouette dark against the pale glow. But as I took a step forward, my heart began to hammer in my chest. That figure, it moved, slowly, unnaturally so, its head jerking as if its neck was stiff, too stiff. Its arms hung at its sides like ragged cloth, its movements stiff and disjointed. As I walked closer, my mind tried to rationalize it. It was just someone coming back, maybe someone who had left, maybe one of the townsfolk who had been away. But there was something wrong about the way they moved, something wrong about the way their feet didn't seem to touch the ground. And then I saw the eyes. It was standing under the street lamp, and the shadows couldn't hide the hollowness in its face. The eyes were black pits, voids that seemed to suck in the light, like they weren't eyes at all, but empty sockets where life used to be. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't look away. My legs were frozen to the spot as I stared at those eyes, those empty, dead eyes. It was someone I recognized, someone I used to know, but this wasn't the person I remembered. It was something else, something wearing their face, their body, but twisted in a way that defied nature. It was Sarah. Her body was still familiar, but her face was so pale, it almost looked gray, and her smile was stretched too wide, too thin. She didn't speak, didn't say anything. She just stood there staring at me with those hollow eyes, her smile growing wider,
the way it always did when she was happy, except this time it was unnatural, like it was forcing its way onto her face. The air felt thick with dread, and the silence was suffocating, every second dragging on longer than the last. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I couldn't. Something was holding me there, tethering me to that spot. And then she moved. It was jerky, mechanical, like a puppet on strings, her head tilted to the side, that too wide smile never faltering. The motion was slow at first, but with every step she took toward me, it became faster, the unnatural stiffness in her body becoming more pronounced, until she was nearly in front of me. I could see it now, the way her eyes didn't blink, didn't show any recognition. There was nothing behind them, nothing but emptiness. And then, just as she passed by me, she whispered, "It's time." The words came on a breath, the voice chilling and wrong. It wasn't Sarah's voice, but something that had stolen it. I watched her walk away, her steps clicking on the pavement, and with each step I could feel the ground beneath me tremble. She didn't stop, didn't look back, just kept walking, as if she were waiting for something, waiting for the next phase to begin. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind was screaming, my body locked in place, unable to react, unable to comprehend what was happening. But then, from behind me, I heard another sound, a shuffle, another figure emerging from the shadows. Slowly, they came into view. This one, I didn't recognize, but the same hollow eyes stared back at me, the same jerky, unnatural movements. It was like a procession, a parade of the dead walking through the town, each one a distorted version of the person they had once been. I stumbled back, trying to find my voice, trying to scream, but nothing came out. The figures continued to walk past me, one by one, their hollow eyes locked on nothing in particular, their movements stiff and mechanical, as though they were all following a script, waiting for something they knew was inevitable. And that's when I realized they were waiting for the ritual. The missing were returning, not as people but as vessels. They were the chosen ones, the sacrifices, and their return wasn't some fluke, some twisted miracle. It was part of the cycle. The ritual had begun again. The creature beneath the town, the thing they had all made a pact with, had risen, and the time had come to feed. I ran. I don't know how or why my legs moved. I don't know how I found the strength to tear myself away from that procession of hollow-eyed figures, but I ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The ground beneath me seemed to shift and quake, as though the town itself was waking up from a long slumber, its very bones groaning with the hunger of what lay beneath. But as I ran, I knew deep in my chest that it was already too late. The ritual had already begun, and there was nothing, no one, that could stop it. It wasn't just Sarah, it wasn't just the other children, the other families. It was everyone. Everyone was part of it, everyone who had been taken, and everyone who would be taken. And as I sprinted through the streets, my heart pounding in my ears, I heard a voice again, a whisper carried on the wind. It's time. It wasn't just Sarah anymore, it was them all. And I knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that I wouldn't escape. The town had chosen, I had been mocked, and there was nowhere left to hide. The moon is impossibly bright tonight. It's as if it's closer than usual, its light sharper, colder. The shadows outside stretch long and eerie, twisting along the buildings like dark fingers, reaching for something, pulling everything in. I don't know why I'm still here. Part of me wonders if I'm even still alive, if this is all some waking nightmare that won't end until it's over. But I know the truth. Whatever's left of this town, of the people I once knew, has been twisted beyond recognition. It's not them anymore. It's something else. Something older. Something that has been waiting for far too long. I'm writing this in the hope that someone will find it. Someone will know what happened here. But deep down, I know that no one is coming. The town is already forgotten by the world. It's as if we never existed at all. The people, the families, the faces that once smiled and spoke on these streets, Now they're just gone. Or worse, they've become something else entirely. I can hear them out there scratching at the walls, clawing at the doors. The growls are low, a constant, unnatural hum in the night. It mixes with the wind, making it sound like the town itself is alive, suffocating under the weight of its own curse. I tried to leave earlier. I packed a bag, ran out the door without looking back. But the moment I hit the road, the streets felt wrong. The world was wrong. It's like the town was pulling me back, tugging at my mind with invisible hands, dragging me back to where it all started. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, suffocating, and my feet moved without my control, leading me back to my house, back to the place that used to feel like home, back to where the last of the town's nightmares waited. Now, I'm here. The house is empty, eerily quiet. I've sealed myself inside, locked all the doors, but I know it's only a matter of time. They're coming. They always come when the moon is full. I feel them circling, waiting, like predators closing in on their prey. I don't know how long I've been here. Hours, days, it doesn't matter anymore. The time is irrelevant. The sun doesn't rise here. It hasn't in what feels like forever. The sky remains that unnatural shade of deep purple, always twilight, always a shadow. The town's pulse has slowed. What was once a vibrant if small place is now a hollow shell, a place where life once thrived, now overtaken by something that lingers in the dark corners, something that waits beneath. I hear them. They're out. The sound of something dragging against the walls, scraping, as if they were trying to tear their way in. The low growls mix with the wind, a constant maddening hum that never stops. They're waiting, just outside the door. I can feel the presence pressing in from every side, like they're just beyond the threshold, watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I don't know if they're human anymore, but I know what they were. They were the ones who left. They were the ones taken, sacrificed, brought back to serve whatever dark force has claimed this town. But I'm the last one. I'm the last to survive. Or so I thought. Maybe that's the real reason they haven't come for me yet. Maybe I'm the final piece of the puzzle. I'm the last offering, the last sacrifice. Maybe that's why I'm still here, still breathing, still writing this. The door, it creaks. I freeze. I didn't hear anyone approach. I didn't hear footsteps, but I hear the door creak. It's unmistakable, slow, deliberate. I turn to face the sound, my heart in my throat. The darkness in the room seems to grow, expanding, like a living thing, swallowing the dim light from the corner lamp. I sit motionless, the pen in my hand, like a lifeline, but I know it won't save me. Nothing will. The door opens, just a crack, just enough for a shadow to slip through. I don't want to look. I can feel it, the presence in the doorway, standing there watching me, but I can't look away. I need to see. I have to know. And there it is, a figure, standing in the doorway, its outline barely visible in the dark. Its form is tall, thin, unnatural in its proportions. Its face is pale, too pale, and I can see the faintest gleam of eyes, glowing like embers in the darkness, burning with an intensity that's almost painful to look at. It's her, Sarah. I can't breathe. My throat tightens. The air in my lungs heavy, choking me. The smile on her face is too wide, too stretched. It's not her smile, but it's hers in some twisted way. The edges of her lips are cracked, unnaturally drawn back in a grin that shouldn't belong on a human face. It's too much, too wrong, like her face is trying to break free from her skin. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. The words are already in my head, crawling in like a poison, worming their way into my thoughts. You should have left when you had the chance. Her voice is not hers, not anymore. It's a hollow echo, a whisper carried on the wind, but I hear it clear as day. I see her eyes empty and endless, pulling me in. The warmth that once existed in her face, in her smile is gone. In its place is something cold, something that never should have been. Her eyes, those ember-like holes burn into me. There's no recognition there, no sign of the girl I knew. This is just a shell, a thing that wears her skin. I want to run, I want to scream, but my body betrays me. I'm rooted to the spot, my muscles locked in place. I can't look away, can't move. As she steps closer, the air around me grows colder, heavier, suffocating. I feel it press against my chest, pushing me back into the chair like the walls are closing in on me. She doesn't say anything more, just stares, her grin widening, her presence growing like a suffocating cloud around me. It's not just her, I know this now. The others are here too. They're waiting, watching, but they won't make a move until the ritual is complete, until I'm the final piece. And I understand now, with horrifying clarity, this isn't a nightmare, this isn't a dream, this is real, this is how it ends. Her voice, that hollow whisper, lingers in the air. It's time. I finally manage to tear my gaze from her just in time to see the other. In the shadows their faces loom, pale and twisted, eyes hollow, bodies jerking in unnatural movements, their limbs stiff, like puppets, strung together by invisible threads. I can hear the low growls now, closer, almost at my back. Their presence is suffocating, crawling in from all sides. I'm the last one left, and I know, with a sickening certainty, that the end has come. I can't fight it anymore. There's nowhere to run, no place left to hide. They've won. The door closes behind me, the final click, echoing through the silence.